I nurtured my wife's youngsters as if they were mine, funded every necessity they had, but when they declared I was merely some fellow their mother wed, I ceased contributing and departed. I've always clung to a handful of fundamental beliefs. Striving diligently for what you possess, accepting accountability for your deeds, and remaining devoted to those you hold dear. I also learned, through bitter lessons mind you, that pouring affection into the wrong individuals can utterly devastate you. This narrative I'm about to unfold, it's about how those principles of mine faced trials and how all I understood about kinship crumbled to dust. It's not a cheerful tale, to be truthful. It's about being taken for granted, exploited, and finally discerning when you've reached your limit. I won't gloss over anything. I'll recount it as it transpired because I believe it's crucial to be authentic about such matters. We're often fed stories of blissful resolutions, but sometimes the conclusion is just, well, a conclusion, and sometimes that's acceptable. It's even essential. I'm not pretending to be some paragon here. I faltered, placed too much faith in people, hoped for their finest qualities, ignored glaring warnings, and bore the consequences. Yet I gained insight too. So how did this saga commence? It started with a woman named Sarah. She was a widow. Her spouse, a military captain, had perished. She had 2 small children, a spirited boy named Ethan, roughly 4 years old, brimming with vitality, and a tiny girl named Lily, barely taking her first steps. I encountered them through a common friend, and I could see at once that Sarah was struggling. It wasn't solely that she was mourning, though of course she was. It went beyond that. She was thoroughly worn out. I mean, you could spot it clearly. In her drooping stance, the dark rings circling her eyes, the way she seemed to operate on fumes. It wasn't merely an "I'm fatigued" sort of weariness. It was a profound, bone-weary exhaustion that stems from shouldering the world's burden solo. I didn't intervene because I felt compelled or harbored some heroic impulse. No, it was simpler. I saw her, genuinely saw her. I observed her floundering, and I wanted to assist, to ease her load and those kids too. I felt this sincere urge to offer some consistency, some aid in their lives. It began modestly, volunteering to watch the little ones so she could nap, handling errands, that sort of thing, but it swiftly escalated. I found myself yearning to be a father to those kids. Their biological dad was absent, and I believed I could step into that void, not to supplant him, naturally, but to provide the affection and support every child merits. I suppose you could say I was aligning my own tenets, diligence, responsibility, fidelity, with their plight. I wanted to give them what their father couldn't, not out of obligation, but because I truly desired to. It felt proper, like the onset of something substantial, something genuine. And for a good while, it was substantial. I threw myself into it wholeheartedly, labored long shifts, not just to settle bills, but to guarantee those kids had everything. Quality education, fine attire, a snug home, ample food on the table, the works. I prioritized their well-being over my own. I wasn't merely addressing essentials either. I aimed to erase any void they might sense from their dad's absence. I wanted to fill that gap, ensure they felt secure and cherished. It wasn't just about tangible provisions, though. I was present for them emotionally too. I attended every school event, every softball game, every performance, shouting encouragement louder than anyone. I was their staunchest advocate. I arranged birthday celebrations, planned family getaways, fulfilled all the paternal roles. And they reciprocated. They adored me back, called me Dad, not just James, but Dad. And you know what? I swallowed it whole. I felt like the most fortunate man alive. I thought I'd crafted this authentic, loving household. I was so engrossed in the vision of it, so eager for it to hold true, that I overlooked the fissures beginning to emerge. I was so intent on constructing this ideal scene that I disregarded the cautionary signals. In hindsight, I realize I was erecting on a foundation far less sturdy than I'd assumed, but at the time, I was fully committed, heart and soul dedicated to making it succeed, to being the finest surrogate father I could be. I invested every shred of myself into it, and for a spell, it appeared to bear fruit. We had our routines, our traditions, our secret jests. We were a family. I was convinced that connection fueled me onward. The initial traces of discord were slight, almost trivial. Small remarks from the kids, a touch of cheekiness, an occasional eye roll. Nothing significant. Nothing you wouldn't anticipate from maturing children. I dismissed it, assured myself it was just typical youthful phases. I didn't want to perceive it as more than that. I recall once when Ethan, likely 13 or 14 then, tossed out a snarky jab about me being uncool for denying him late nights out. Lily, a few years his junior, chimed in with a similarly impudent comment. It pricked a little, but I chuckled it off, told myself they were merely testing boundaries as teens do. Yet as they aged, the insolence grew more pronounced. Ethan, by 17, was a full-fledged rebel, ignoring curfews, rejecting my counsel, behaving as though he was entitled to do as he pleased. Standard adolescent defiance, perhaps, but it felt distinct, sharper somehow, with a bite I couldn't ignore. Lily, around 14 by then, began mirroring her brother's demeanor, eye rolls at me, dismissing my directives, brushing aside my concerns. They united against me, signaling they held neither my authority nor me in regard. It was as if they were conspiring, probing how far they could push me. What worsened it was Sarah's reaction, or rather, her lack thereof. She wouldn't intervene, wouldn't bolster me. She'd sit there, typically engrossed in her phone, feigning ignorance. Sometimes she'd even subtly undermine me, fidgeting with her device or sighing as if I were the irrational one. It wasn't merely passive, it was almost as though she encouraged their insolence. She'd make excuses. Oh, they're just tired, or it's a passing stage, or let's keep the calm. Always some justification, but in truth, it was a pattern of enabling their rudeness. She was eroding my standing, isolating me further. I started feeling like the sole one who cared about instilling limits, about guiding them toward right and wrong. I began questioning Sarah's motives. Was she truly this oblivious, or was she deliberately weakening me? I had my first real awakening around that time, yet I still didn't fully grasp it. The genuine tipping point, when everything shattered, struck one evening. Ethan ambled in far past curfew, hours late, no call, no message, nothing. I was frantic with worry, but when he finally swaggered in, he acted like it was no issue. I asked, calmly mind you, where he'd been, just seeking some responsibility. He didn't even meet my gaze, just muttered, "Relax, I'm not a kid." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a curt dismissal. Then he added, "You're not my real dad, stop pretending you own me." Just like that, years of devotion, care, and effort hurled back at me. It was a blow to the stomach. Lily, hovering nearby, joined in. "Yeah, you're just some guy mom married." As if all our time together, all our shared memories, amounted to nothing. Something within me fractured. Not fury, not yet, but a deep disenchantment. Worst of all, Sarah uttered not a word, just stood there, silent. Her quiet was the ultimate betrayal, confirming every suspicion I'd begun to harbor. I was nothing but a convenience, a provider, a substitute for what their true dad couldn't offer. That was the instant I realized the family I thought I'd forged was an illusion. It wasn't long before it repeated. This time, Lily trashed the kitchen, and I asked her to clean it. Simple enough, basic accountability, right? But she just glared at me and said, "Why don't you do it? It's your house, isn't it?" That stung, not just the disrespect, but the tone, like I was some servant whose sole purpose was to tidy up after them. It underscored my outsider role, reducing me to a mere caretaker. Then Ethan, right on cue, piped up with, "You're not even our real dad." They were tag-teaming me, reinforcing their rejection, ensuring I knew my place, or lack thereof, in their lives. But this time, Sarah's response clinched it. She didn't shout, didn't get mad, just glanced at me, barely lifting her eyes from her phone, and said, "They've got a point, James. Maybe back off." That was it. That was when I knew it was over. It wasn't just the kids' defiance anymore. It was Sarah explicitly aligning with them, against me, the man who devoted years to their upbringing. It wasn't anger or even hurt. Not really. It was clarity. I was done. No going back. This wasn't a family. It was a sham, and I was ready to walk away. I did something I never imagined. I stopped. I stopped giving, stopped caring, stopped trying. It wasn't a rash, spur-of-the-moment choice. It was deliberate, intentional withdrawal. I quit providing. No more rides, No more pocket money, no more shelter, no more guidance, no more concern. I let them face the fallout of their actions. It was a complete reversal from how I'd been for years. I'd always been there, no matter what. Now I was gone. It hurt, I won't deny it. It clashed with every instinct I had. I'd sunk so much of myself into this family, and stepping away was agonizing, but I knew it was vital. I had to shield myself. I knew it wouldn't be smooth, knew they'd push back, but I was ready. I'd hit my breaking point. I'd given them all I had, and they'd flung it back at me. I was through being their doormat. At first, they mocked me, laughed, sneered, threw sarcastic barbs, smirked whenever I passed by. They thought they'd won, thought they didn't need me, banking on Sarah to fill the void I'd left. They were mistaken. They'd jab at me, mimicking my old rules, poking fun at how I'd tried to set standards. They'd say stuff like, "Oh, are we breaking the code?" with exaggerated flair, rolling their eyes and grinning at each other, trying to rile me up. Sarah, oh, she stepped up to cover my absence, financed their shopping sprees, kept their weekends packed with junk food runs and frivolous spending. She kept them smug, kept feeding their notion that I was dispensable. But I knew it wouldn't hold. I knew Sarah's means were finite. She didn't earn what I did. She couldn't sustain that level indefinitely. So I stayed silent, let them revel in it, let them think they'd triumphed. I knew reality would hit soon. I didn't argue, didn't react, just watched, quietly awaiting the inevitable. It was a strange patience, born of certainty that I was right. I knew their arrogance rested on shaky ground, and that ground would eventually give way. I just had to bide my time. And then, bit by bit, things shifted. The shopping trips dwindled, the fast food outings grew sparse, new clothes stopped appearing. Small changes at first, but evident. Then bigger issues cropped up. School fees became a worry. Ethan landed in trouble at school and Sarah didn't know how to cope. Lily smashed her phone with no cash to fix it. I recall the first morning Ethan missed the lift I used to give him. He'd always taken it for granted, rarely even muttering thanks. Now he was on his own, sprinting for the bus, arriving breathless and frazzled, or so I heard. A minor thing, sure, but telling. It was the first real crack in their cushy bubble. And I'll confess, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not glee, not quite, but a subtle vindication. I knew what it was to struggle, to hustle for every scrap. I remembered my youth, clawing to get by. They, though, had always had it handed to them. I said nothing, just observed. I saw Lily's frustration when she realized her busted phone wouldn't magically renew. I heard her griping to Sarah, heard Sarah's flimsy excuses thinning out. She was running low on funds, starting to see she couldn't match what I'd provided. That same day, Lily had a full meltdown, whining about how unfair it was her phone stayed broken. Sarah finally admitted, in a hushed tone, that she didn't have the money then. A tiny confession, but a big one. It was the first time she'd openly owned her limits. It marked the end of their denial. Reality was sinking in. They were beginning to grasp that their cushioned life had hinged on me, the one they'd so easily cast aside. The free ride was done, and they were feeling the jolts. It wasn't long after the phone fiasco that Sarah confronted me. She was livid, naturally, accused me of being petty, of shirking my duties. That word, duties, stuck with me. It revealed how she viewed me, not as a partner, not a father figure, but a resource with obligations to meet, a walking bank. She ranted on, blaming me for all their woes, calling me selfish, unmanly, claiming I was deserting them. She tried to guilt me, paint me as the villain. It was all deflection, of course, shifting her own shortcomings onto me. I let her vent, let her unload it all, and when she finally paused, I asked her one plain question. Why had she never stood up for me? Why had she always backed the kids, even when they were rude? And that's when it hit. The truth spilled out. She sneered, yes, sneered, and said, "Because I agree with them, James. You were never really their father." It was a slap, but also validation of all I'd suspected. And she didn't stop there. She admitted she'd told the kids not to let me dominate them. "I raised them alone before you, and I can do it again," she declared. That was the clincher, not just neglect, but calculated long-term sabotage. She'd actively fostered their disdain, poisoned them against me. Ethan and Lily stood in the hall, watching, arms folded, smug grins on their faces, like they were savoring it. And in that moment I thought, this is them, the real them, not the sweet kids I tried to nurture, but spoiled, entitled brats propped up by their cunning mother. Despite the sting, the betrayal, I felt relief. It was over. The pretense was dead. I had my answer, clear as day, and I knew I'd chosen right to leave. The truth was ugly, but freeing. I was unshackled. But it got uglier before it improved. The kids, fueled by Sarah's fury and their own arrogance, ramped up their antics. It started small. My stuff went missing, then key work files vanished from my laptop. I suspected they were messing with me, but had no proof. Then it worsened. One morning, I found my car scratched, a long, deep gouge down the side. That's when I acted. I set up hidden cameras inside and around the house, told no one, not even Sarah, just wanted evidence. And I got it. Days later, I caught them on tape, Ethan and Lily in my closet, giggling, ripping my shirts with scissors. Pure vandalism. I didn't confront them, didn't shout, just stayed quiet. I saved the footage, photographed the damage, collected their threatening messages, all proof of their growing hostility. I played along, letting them think they'd won, while I prepared to exit. I knew I had to protect myself, not just emotionally, but legally. This was going to get nasty, and I wanted to be ready. I was building my defense, stockpiling ammo for whatever came next. It was grim, pathetic even, but I resolved to handle it with dignity and restraint. I wouldn't sink to their level. I'd be shrewd, strategic, silent. Next, I saw a lawyer. I laid out the whole mess, showed him my evidence. He listened, nodding now and then, and when I finished, he said I had a solid case. We talked divorce, even a restraining order given the kids' escalating aggression. I also filed a police report about the property damage. Odd, reporting my stepkids, but necessary. I needed an official record to shield myself from future claims or legal traps. It was another move to cut ties, to disentangle from this toxic mess. Then one afternoon, while Sarah and the kids were out, I packed a bag. Just essentials, what mattered. I left the rest. Furniture, appliances, all the stuff I'd amassed over years. It didn't matter. What did was my freedom, my peace. I left an envelope on the counter. Divorce papers, copies of the police report, damage photos, threatening texts, a formal break. No turning back. I walked out, didn't glance back, got in my scratched car, and drove off. No real plan. Just knew I had to escape that poisonous place. The final act was financial. I closed joint accounts, cut Sarah's access to my money. Harsh, yes, but needed. I had to stop her from bankrolling the kids' entitlement, make it clear the handouts were over. It was the last severing, the ultimate retreat. It was done. Predictably, Sarah lost it, called non-stop, left raging voicemails, branded me a coward, a deserter, a monster. She swore she didn't need me, could manage alone, would thrive without my cash. All bluster. She was in denial, dodging reality. I didn't pick up, didn't reply, just blocked her. I refused to wade back into the fray. I'd made my stand, said my piece, and I was finished. I had to focus on myself, on rebuilding. Then the kids started texting. First the same cocky jabs, but slowly the tone shifted. They sounded anxious, even sorry, apologized, admitted life was tough without me. Finally, Lily sent 3 words. I miss you. A big change, but too late. The harm was done, trust shattered. I couldn't return, even if I'd wanted to. I stayed mute, didn't answer. I saw their regret, but held firm. I'd learned a brutal lesson and wouldn't repeat it. I'd given all, and they'd spat on it. I was done. My silence said it. You chose, now live with it. So that's my story. Not pretty, but real. I learned hard truths. Never let people undervalue you, never beg for respect, never waste effort on those who don't see your worth. When you're used, disrespected, leave. Don't waver, don't look back. It's a tough lesson, tougher to enact, but vital for your sanity, your dignity. You deserve kindness, respect, love, and if you're not getting it, You've got the right, the duty to walk away. Some only see your value when you're gone, and by then, it's too late. A sad fact, but a fact. Don't wait for them to see it. Know it yourself and act on it. It's not selfishness. It's self-awareness, guarding your heart, mind, soul. Thanks for reading. I hope this helps someone out there in a similar bind. You're not alone, and you deserve joy. Don't let anyone say otherwise. Choose yourself. After I drove away that day, the scratched car humming beneath me, I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. It was more like a hollow quiet, the kind that settles after a storm tears through and leaves nothing but debris. I'd severed the ties, burned the bridges, but the weight of it all lingered, heavy on my chest. I didn't know where I was headed, not really. Just kept driving until the city lights faded into the rearview and the road stretched dark and endless ahead. I ended up at a cheap motel an hour out, the kind with flickering neon signs and stained carpets. I checked in, tossed my bag on the sagging bed, and sat there, staring at the peeling wallpaper. For the first time in years, I was alone. Not just physically, but in every sense. No kids to ferry, no Sarah to placate, no expectations to meet. Just me. And yet, that silence was deafening. The next few weeks were a blur of practicalities. Finding a small apartment, shifting what little I'd taken, setting up a new routine. I rented a one-bedroom place in a quiet part of town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. No echoes of Ethan's stomping boots or Lily's whining voice bouncing off the walls. I liked the simplicity, bare floors, a second-hand couch, a coffee pot that gurgled every morning. I threw myself into work, picking up extra hours at the construction firm I'd been with for years. The physical labor, hauling lumber, hammering nails, felt good, grounding. It kept my mind from wandering too far back. But at night, when the tools went quiet and the apartment grew still, the thoughts crept in. Had I been too harsh? Could I have salvaged something? I'd replay those final months, their sneers, Sarah's cold agreement, and the doubts would dissolve. No, I'd done what I had to. Still, the ache didn't vanish. It just dulled into something I could carry. I didn't hear from them for a while. Not directly. Word trickled through mutual friends that Sarah was scrambling, dipping into savings she'd barely touched before, selling off furniture I'd left behind. Ethan had dropped out of school, picked up some dead-end job at a gas station. Lily was skipping classes, hanging with a rough crowd. I'd feel a pang at that. Old habits die hard, but I'd remind myself it wasn't my burden anymore. I'd given them a decade of my life, my savings, my heart, and they'd made their choice. I wasn't their safety net. Still, I kept the security footage, the texts, the police report, tucked in a folder in my desk drawer, just in case. My lawyer had warned me Sarah might try something, a desperate grab for alimony or worse, and I wasn't taking chances. About 3 months in, I started rebuilding. Not just my space, but myself. I joined a gym, not to impress anyone, but to sweat out the bitterness that clung like damp rot. I'd lift weights until my arms shook, run the treadmill until my lungs burned, and slowly, I felt stronger, not just in body, but in resolve. I picked up old hobbies too. Woodworking, something I'd loved as a kid but dropped when family life took over. I'd spend weekends in a rented garage space, sanding down oak planks, shaping them into shelves, tables, things I could touch and trust. It was therapy, in a way, creating something solid when so much had crumbled. Friends noticed the shift. Guys from work, a couple buddies from way back. They'd drag me out for beers, crack jokes about my bachelor renaissance, and I'd laugh, genuinely, for the first time in ages. I wasn't whole yet, but I was getting there. Then, 6 months after I'd left, Sarah showed up. I was unloading groceries from my truck when I saw her car, an old sedan I'd once fixed, pull into the lot. She stepped out, thinner than I remembered, her face pinched with something between anger and desperation. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression blank, set the bags down, and waited. She didn't waste time. "You happy now, James?" she snapped, arms crossed tight. "You've ruined us. Ethan's a mess, Lily's failing school, we're barely scraping by. This what you wanted?" I let her words hang there, sharp and accusing, before I answered. "I didn't ruin anything, Sarah. You did that when you let them treat me like dirt and called it parenting. Her eyes flashed, but I kept going, calm but firm. I gave you all everything I had. You chose to throw it away. That's on you. She bristled, launched into a tirade, called me heartless, selfish, said I'd abandoned my family. I almost laughed at that word. Family. We were never a family, I cut in. Families don't sabotage each other. You made me a stranger in my own home. She faltered then, her voice dropping. We need help, James. I can't do this alone. There it was, the real reason she'd come. Not remorse, not reconciliation, just another plea for me to fix their mess. I shook my head. You said you could manage without me. So manage. She stared, mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words, then turned and stormed off. I watched her car peel out, tires squealing, and felt, not anger, not sadness, but a strange peace. That chapter was closed. A month later, Ethan appeared. I was sanding a chair in the garage when he walked up, hands shoved in his pockets, looking scruffy and tired. He didn't meet my eyes at first, just kicked at the gravel. Hey, he mumbled. I nodded, kept sanding. He shifted, awkward, then said, I messed up, okay? I shouldn't have said that stuff. Things suck now. Mom's broke, Lily's a wreck. I didn't get it before, what you did for us. I stopped, set the sandpaper down, and looked at him. He was 17, but he seemed smaller, deflated. I'm sorry, he added, voice cracking. I believed him, saw the regret, but it didn't erase the years of disrespect. I hear you, I said, measured. But apologies don't undo what's done. You've got to figure this out now, Ethan. I'm not your fallback. He nodded, eyes down, and left without another word. I went back to sanding, the rhythm steadying me. It hurt, turning him away, but it was right. They had to learn. Lily's turn came weeks later. A letter slipped under my door. Her handwriting was shaky, the note short. I miss how things were. I didn't mean it. Please come back. I read it twice, felt that old pull, but folded it away. Missing me wasn't enough. They'd had me, and they'd trashed it. I didn't reply. Silence was still my answer. Now, a year out, I'm steady. Work's good, the apartment's home. My hands are calloused from building things that last. I've got friends, a life that's mine. The scars are there. Trust doesn't come easy anymore, but I'm not bitter. I've learned who I am, what I won't tolerate. Sarah and the kids. They're surviving, I hear. Barely. I don't wish them ill, but I don't lose sleep over it either. I chose myself, and I'd do it again. Sometimes, that's the only victory that matters.